Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight we're going to start out with Nora Ephron. Nora Ephron died recently at the age of 73. She was a New York writer who wrote books, screenplays, and newspaper and magazine columns. Here's Matthew Bannister of the BBC4 to talk a little bit about Nora Ephron.
Nora Ephron was best known as the screenwriter and director of some of the world's most successful romantic comedies. In When Harry Met Sally and Sleepless in Seattle, she created two films which have delighted successive generations of moviegoers. But Nora was also an accomplished and witty essayist, novelist, and blogger. She was the daughter of two screenwriters who produced scripts for films like Carousel and There's No Business Like Show Business. Nora drew on her own life experiences in her work, most notably turning her breakup with her second husband, the Watergate journalist Carl Bernstein, into a novel called Heartburn, which became a film starring Jack Nicholson.
Well, Nora Ephron was born in New York, but since her parents were screenwriters, they moved out to Beverly Hills when she was a young girl, just like Bert Schneider, our friend. And since they were screenwriters, everything was material for them. She went to Beverly Hills High School. Then, unlike Bert Schneider, she moved back east to go to college at Wellesley, and her parents made that into a screenplay. It ultimately became the movie Take Her, She's Mine, with Jimmy Stewart starring as Nora Ephron's father, and Sandra Dee starring as Nora Ephron. That's Sandra Dee in her post-Gidget pre-Bobby Darin era. And it's your standard 1963 college girl rebels but still loves her parents' story. Here they are at the airport as she goes off to college.
I want to say to you right now that this is the proudest moment in my whole life. I get to see you growing up like this. You're a wonderful daughter, Molly. And now you're going to college. And you on this flight, Molly?
Yeah, you.
Well,
I see you.
College, you know what college is. College is an investment in the future, a future of fulfillment and happiness. And you know what every woman's hope for fulfillment and happiness is? A marriage. A satisfying, a beautiful marriage.
You want 66, Wolf?
Yeah, I see you.
Fantabulous.
Scooby.
Scooby-Doo.
Where was I?
I mean, about marriage.
Oh, yeah. Well, what
But you want 66, Molly?
Yeah, and she'll see you. Don't you know any girls?
Oh, it's okay, Daddy. I get it, and I'm really going to try hard. I promise you.
Yeah, those were 1963 values. We'll talk about that a little later in the show with my three sons. While at Wellesley, she was a summer intern at the White House and once remarked she was the only intern that JFK never hit on. After Wellesley, Nora Ephron moved to New York City, worked for the New York Post for a while. In the 70s, she met all the right people, and she met Carl Bernstein, who was the reporter who was one of the people who broke the Watergate story for the Washington Post. They got married. She helped write the screenplay for All the President's Men. And then he was having an affair on her, and they broke up, and she wrote the screenplay Heartburn, where Meryl Streep plays her. So Nora Ephron was played in the movies by both Sandra Dee and Meryl Streep. That's unusual. Jack Nicholson played the Carl Bernstein character, and Carly Simon sang the famous theme song from Heartburn.
Baby sneezes, mommy pleases, daddy breezes in. I know nothing stays the same, but if you're willing to play the game, then we'll be coming around again.
That was her big movie break, so to speak. She really got into the movies after that. She divorced Carl Bernstein. Ultimately, she married Nick Pileggi, who wrote Wise Guys, a story about Henry Hill. And for those of you who are regulars to this show, we did Henry Hill recently when he died. Her most famous screenplay was When Harry Met Sally, the movie with Meg Ryan and Billy Crystal, which we're going to touch on in a little while. But she also wrote the screenplay for Sleepless in Seattle with Tom Hanks. Here's Tom Hanks in the famous airport scene of Sleepless in Seattle where he sees Meg Ryan for the first time. She doesn't speak here, but she serves Nora Ephron very well in the movie.
This is what single people do. They try other people on and see how they fit. But everybody's an adjustment. Nobody's perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect. Come on.
And she also wrote the screenplay for Julie and Julia, a vehicle for Meryl Streep to play Julia Child. I'm not crazy about it, but a lot of people really liked it.
Oh, never apologize.
From writer-director Nora Ephron.
That is good, isn't it?
It's amazing. Meryl Streep, Amy Adams.
I was drowning and she pulled me out of the ocean.
Don't get carried away. What's for dinner? What's for dinner?
Oh my God.
You have no real talent for cooking.
Julie and Julia, based on 2 true stories.
Here Nora Ephron talks about writing as a craft and When Harry Met Sally, her most famous movie.
My parents thought that writing was a great way to make a living, that it was really fun, that if we were lucky we would become writers. I think they also felt that a certain way of looking at the world, the writer's way of kind of being able to distance yourself from things, was something they wanted us to learn whether or not we became writers. But they taught us to look at everything. I mean, they were probably ruthless in this way, in that if you came to them with a sad story, they did not want to hear it. They didn't care. If something bad had happened to you, what they said was, someday you will think this is funny. Someday this will be a great story. Everything is copy. Everything's material. And P.S., I'm not interested in it until it is. I don't care about sad stories. So if you have a parent who rewards you for turning whatever there is in your life into a funny thing happened to me on the way to elementary school today, you start doing that. And it makes you a writer. I had started writing scripts because everybody in New York was writing scripts, and it doesn't matter how good the script is, it's the actors. And if they're not funny, and if they don't know how to make your joke work, you're dead. It just has floated away like a little lost hologram or something. And I look at, stuff in When Harry Met Sally, at the beginning of When Harry Met Sally, when Meg Ryan gets into the car with Billy Crystal and they're driving from Chicago to New York. And I had written some very funny stuff when they got into that car. And yet when I saw it in front of an audience, what made the stuff funny was what Meg and Billy brought to the scene. Meg brought in a can of hairspray and sprayed her hair before starting to drive. So you immediately knew who she was. And Billy brought a bunch of grapes and began spitting the pits out, and one of them hits the window, and it's a huge laugh. Now, all of that is stuff that the writer can say, well, I'm the one who thought of these 2 people, one kind of uptight and the other determined to kind of prick that, But that's what makes something that's funny into a thing that people laugh at, which is a very different thing. It's the difference between a single and a triple in baseball.
I thought you didn't believe men and women could be friends.
That's right. They can't be friends. Unless both of them are involved with other people, then they can. This is an amendment to the earlier rule. If the 2 people are in relationships, the pressure of possible involvement is lifted.
Finally, a tribute to Nora Ephron from the Chicago Tribune. Ever the exception to the rule, she brushed aside gender barriers on her way to success as a newspaper reporter, magazine writer, author, playwright, and screenwriter. She beat the guys at what used to be their game and never apologized for thinking like a woman. As a high school freshman, she confessed she set her sights on a career in journalism because it was probably a good way to meet men. In her 60s, she penned an essay called I Hate My Purse. She wrote another called Maintenance, defined as what you have to do just so you can walk out the door, knowing that if you go to the market and bump into a guy who once rejected you, you won't have to hide behind a stack of canned foods. Are feminists allowed to say things like that? You bet. They're also allowed to fake orgasms, as Meg Ryan did in the famous scene in When Harry Met Sally, one of 3 Ephron films nominated for an Academy Award. That subtle genius of that scene is to suggest that guys, metaphorically or otherwise, that perhaps the applause they're so used to isn't 100% earned. In later years, Ephron wasn't embarrassed to lament the wattles on her aging neck or describe hair dye as the most powerful weapon older women have against the youth culture. There's a reason why 40, 50, and 60 don't look the way they used to, and it's not because of feminism or better living through exercise, it's because of hair dye, she wrote. I can make a case that it's at least partly responsible for the number of women entering and managing to stay in the job market in the middle age. Still, she was generous in her advice to younger women. Consider her essay, Considering the Alternative, in which she muses on the word old, and the D word death containing this gem. If anyone young is reading this, go right this minute, put on a bikini, and don't take it off until you're 34. She struck a more serious note in a commencement address at her alma mater, Wellesley, in 1996, urging the graduates to choose not to be a lady. There's still a glass ceiling. One of the things people always say to you if you get upset is, don't take it personally, but listen hard to what's going on, and please, I beg you, take it personally. Above all, be the heroine of your own life, not the victim, because you don't have the alibi my class had. Those are words to live by, and not just for the younger generation. Women today have fewer barriers and fewer excuses. Don't let anyone tell you you can't follow your dreams or dye your hair. We're going to close tonight with Don Grady, whose real name was Donna Grady, but you know him as Don Grady, and you know him better as Robbie Douglas. He was one of My Three Sons, and he died recently at the age of 68. My Three Sons was a long-running 1960s family sitcom, and as Robbie Douglas, he played first the middle son, with Tim Considine playing his older brother Mike, and Stanley Livingston playing his younger brother Chip. Then they wrote Mike out of it, and so Robbie became the oldest son. They adopted Ernie, who was Chip's real-life brother. And Robbie was sort of your prototypical 1960s kid, good-looking, a lot of girls, always had dilemmas, but nothing like drugs or anything like that. Of course, the feature of My Three Sons was Fred MacMurray, as Steve Douglas, their dad. And this was one of the 1960s shows that illustrated a phenomenon. When women get older, they get into their 40s and 50s, and they were movie stars. It's hard for them to find roles. Nora Ephron would probably have something to say about that. But a lot of the 40s tough guys, the guys who were in their 20s and the 40s, moved on and were able to play kind fathers in the 1960s sitcoms. This includes Robert Young in Father Knows Best, and Hugh Beaumont in Leave It to Beaver, and Brian Keith in Family Affair. And Fred MacMurray was the classic, prototypical 1960s beneficent father after a career where he played Walter Neff in Double Indemnity against Barbara Stanwyck and Edward G. Robinson, and in the Caine Mutiny, where he was a really sort of a not a very pleasant character. Great actor, and so this was the appeal of My Three Sons. It also featured for a time the post-Lucy Fred Mertz, a.k.a. William Frawley, but he also got written out of the show. There was always plot changes going on in that show, and the show actually moved from ABC to CBS. But the one constant factor on there was the heartthrob Robbie Douglas, Don Grady. Don Grady got his start as a Mouseketeer in the early 50s. He was one of the younger Mouseketeers. To be a Mouseketeer in the early 50s was a big deal. I mean, you had to have a lot of talent and gave you a leg up in Hollywood. Here he is doing one of their typical Broadway numbers. Those early 50s Mouseketeers things were sort of early Broadway numbers. And here he is as one of the young Mouseketeers, introducing the older star power Mouseketeers like Annette.
I'm Dawn Cheryl, and I'm Doreen. Matinee today, matinee today. We're gonna see our friends the Musketeers. Matinee today, hip hooray today. How we'll applaud as each of them appears. We watch a show on television faithfully, and now we're gonna meet them one by one. Till we're old and gray, we won't forget the day of the Musketeer matinee.
Yeah, that's typical 1955 Mickey Mouse Club. But what it did was, it made him a supporting kid actor in Hollywood. And then when My Three Sons appeared in 1960, again, with the hook being Fred MacMurray, who was coming off a very, very big-time movie career. Fred MacMurray was very demanding about the shooting in this show. And Don Grady got a part as one of My Three Sons, which turned out to be a great career move at the time because My Three Sons actually ran for over 10 years and was one of the most popular 1960s television shows. Here is a standard, typical plot with Robbie Douglas trying to coerce his widowed father, Steve, Fred MacMurray, into a date with some plotline love interest.
Dad, have you called her yet?
Have I called who?
Miss Coulter.
No, I haven't called Miss Coulter. I figure most people don't get to an office until 9, and it's not quite that yet.
Good, I'm glad I got to you first. Now, I know you think I'm butting in, Dad, but honest, we've got to have a talk.
Rob, I have had enough kindly advice about staying young. Now, if you don't mind, I'd just like to go on aging quiet.
Yeah, but you're going to let this real great scenery get out of your hands again, Dad.
Miss Coulter is not scenery, she's a woman. Well, maybe she's there by now. I'll give her a ring.
Now, Dad, here's what you should say to her. Play it real smooth. Hello, I would like to speak to you about Ernie, but I'm afraid my time is limited. How about lunch?
Would you please go away?
Okay, Dad, then don't play it real smooth, but at least take her out to lunch.
Hello, I'd like to speak to Miss Coleman, please.
Dad, honestly...
Please go away, will you?
But, Dad, there's something about kicking things around at lunch that beats staring at a picture of President Washington in somebody's office.
Notice the California undercurrent theme of staying young in the 60s. Fred MacMurray used to sit in his easy chair smoking a pipe. It was real hard to get around the fact that he was the insurance agent who was crooked and planning a murder with Barbara Stanwyck 20 years before in Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity. But he managed to pull it off, and you could say that everything went downhill in the United States after Fred MacMurray with his pipe was no longer on TV. That was the last of your real benign father figures who knew best. Here they are again, and here's William Frawley sneaking in for a little bit as Bub. William Frawley got replaced a little later on, and he wasn't too happy about his replacement. They say it was because insurance of health reasons, but who knows what the deal was with William Frawley. He had a little trouble with Lucy, too, for a while.
Robbie Douglas, I don't know how you can say such awful things about Hank.
Well, they're true. And don't you believe that if something's true, even though it's unpleasant, you ought to face it?
But where's your loyalty? I thought you were Hank's best friend.
Well, I am. I'm Hank's best friend in spite of all his faults. I like Hank even though he is a loudmouth, self-centered rat fink.
That's enough. I won't listen to another word. Hank Ferguson isn't perfect, but he'd never betray a friend. He's not too loud at all, and suppose he does laugh at his own jokes. They're funny. You haven't said anything funny in days.
If you think Hank's so great, why don't you call him and tell him so?
Maybe I will. And the next time you're facing the truth, why don't you take a good look at yourself, you Benedict Arnold?
Hello, Mr. Casey.
Hello, Hank. Come in.
Miss Douglas, how are you, sir? Could I see outside a minute, Rob?
Sure. You Benedict Arnold.
What are you talking about? I trusted you like a brother, and what did you do? What did I do?
You turned my girl against me, that's all. Telling her I was a loudmouth, self-centered rat fink and laughed at my own jokes.
Well, you told me to tell her that, and I did, and she got sore at me and said all those things I said about you weren't true. And you keep your grubby 6'3" hands off of me.
Okay. We really went fine at first, and all of a sudden I noticed her staring at me kind of funny like.
What was your idea?
You know, Bob, friendship is a wonderful thing.
Nothing like it.
Yeah, that's 60s comedy, and let's not forget that great My Three Sons theme song, written by Frank DeVol. Before we close on Don Gray, I'd like to point out two things. He tried to do a sequel, you know, what happened after Robbie got married, but it didn't work out. But he was a musician, and one of the things he did was he wrote theme songs, and he wrote the theme song for Phil Donahue. Listen to a little bit of it, and notice how much it sounds like the My Three Sons theme. Written by Don Grady. While we're on My Three Sons, another person died this week. Doris Singleton was 92. She had a recurring role on My Three Sons for about a year. She was much better known for her recurring role 10 years before on I Love Lucy. She was Carolyn Appleby, and she was always getting in fights and was always jealous of Lucy. Except for little Ricky, she was the last surviving cast member of I Love Lucy, and it's a little coincidence she and Don Grady died in the same week. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I'd like to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. And since we were talking about Don Grady as a musician, to close, we're going to use one of the songs that he did as part of a rock group in 1967. Part of a group called the Yellow Balloon, and they had one hit, and coincidentally it was called the Yellow Balloon. Made it about halfway up the charts. It's your typical Flower Power 1967 song. In tribute to Don Grady, here's Like a Yellow Balloon.
I never felt this way before. It's a feeling that I can't explain. There's one thing that I know for sure. I can tell you're feeling it too. Cause when I'm walking with you in the rain, it's like a yellow balloon. It's like a yellow balloon.